Well, we did witness the finance minister present the interim budget for 2024-25. Of course, a lot has been decoded, a lot has been said, but we haven't spoken to economists at large. So thank you so much for joining us, DK Joshi, Mr. Madan Sabnavis. Thank you for sparing the time. Please help our viewers understand the big numbers. We have seen the fiscal deficit projections, but what do you make of this? DK Joshi, to you first.
Well, I think this is as per expectation. Fiscal consolidation was committed by the government, and they're treading on that path to fiscal deficit at 4.5% of GDP by 25-26. So this was not the fiscal consolidation path was not unexpected. Now the way they do it is what we were looking for closely. And here, I think they have not cut the capital expenditure too much. They have retained the focus on the investment spend. They only cut it mildly. The cut is mostly from the revenue expenditure side. And the assumptions behind the budget, whether it is growth or it is tax collections, are pretty realistic. So I would say that the budget is very much as it should have been, the interim budget, without any populism in it. And it is good for the bond markets. We're already seeing the borrowings are lower, so the yields have started softening. It is also good for foreign investors because it gives them comfort on the fiscal consolidation path. We are a part of now JP Morgan index, I think, so that exposes you to more scrutiny, and it is reducing the cost of borrowing for the government. So clearly, I think it's a budget which is focused on fiscal consolidation, tries to promote growth, and also I think it is non-inflationary in nature. So I think all these three things make it a prudent budget in the current times.
All right, Madan Sabnavis, do you agree a prudent budget at large, and how will you help our viewers decode these numbers? Of course, our viewers need to sort of understand these terminologies. So, your thoughts?
See, what DK Joshi is saying is perfectly fair because the government has embarked on the journey to bring the fiscal deficit ratio, which is always expressed as a percentage of GDP, to 4.5% by fiscal 26, that is 25-26. And as a first step, we're moving from 5.8 to 5.1%. So I think this is the starting point of the budget. And we should remember that the FM has been reiterating off and on that don't expect anything dramatic out here. So therefore, on the taxation side, there have been absolutely no measures. One indication, of course, is that probably when we have the main budget in the month of June or July, at that point of time, there is something which we as individuals could be looking out for. Maybe corporates could also be looking out for some kind of benefits. But in this particular budget, I think the focus has been more in terms of laying down the fiscal path. So once you say what's going to be the fiscal deficit ratio, you know what's going to be the overall size of the budget, you know how much is going to be the borrowing program. And based on the kind of revenue projections made, which DK Joshi has rightly said are very, very realistic, they go in line with whatever we are seeing in terms of growth in GDP, the expenditure will be charted out. So it's more of an expenditure-based budget where we're looking at different components of expenditure, where a push is required, like CapEx, we've seen that happening. And otherwise, I think there's been a lot of reallocation of funds across different schemes to make sure that nothing is left out. So to that extent, I think it's been a fairly pragmatic budget and will deliver what it's supposed to, at least until June, July, after which there could probably be some major changes which the government could think of introducing.
All right, spotlight on the full budget in July, but DK Joshi, to you then on nominal GDP growth projections, really. Of course, India has been outperforming global markets, but your thoughts on the projections laid out today?
Well, I think it's our assessment was also that we'll grow at 10.5% in nominal terms in the coming fiscal year. I think they haven't specifically given the real GDP growth projection, but I'm assuming by what the economic survey said, or a brief document in lieu of the economic survey that was released said, that was, I think, 7% real GDP growth, and rest of it is from inflation. So we are expecting real growth to be a little lower than what the budget is probably assuming, and inflation to be a little higher. But we are from the nominal growth perspective, we are at 10.5%, which is, I think it's interesting that in the current fiscal, the real GDP growth exceeded expectations, but nominal GDP growth came lower than expectations. But in the coming fiscal year, it's opposite is going to happen. I think the real GDP growth is going to be higher than what it is in the current fiscal, but nominal growth is going to be higher in the coming fiscal, but the real growth is going to be lower. I think, put it simply, I think what it means is that the higher nominal growth allows the government to collect more revenues, because the nominal growth is the base for revenue collection in some sense.
Right. Okay. So, Madan, Sabnavis, to you then, of course, food inflation concerns persist, geopolitical tensions persist. How do you think India can continue to remain resilient to these challenges?
See, in terms of inflation and looking at food inflation, I think there's very little that anyone can do. So once we have a crop failure, like what we have seen in Kharif and probably what we're seeing also in terms of Rabi, where pulses could be, that chana production could be lower, I think we'll have to just live with higher prices. What the government can do is through selective intervention, you can make sure that the supplies are augmented when you look through inputs. But generally, what we have seen is that there is little control anybody has, especially over food inflation. And we'll just have to wait for the next crop to come and prices to start easing. So that's been our experience, and I think that's what's going to happen. Now, in terms of geopolitical tensions, whatever happens to global commodity prices, I think the reference is normally towards oil. I think this particular budget is based on the fact that the oil economy is going to remain very, very stable. We're not going to see any increase in the price of oil. And notwithstanding the problems which we are seeing in West Asia, I think things are going to remain fairly normal. The fact that we have actually lowering the overall subsidy on fertilizers is indicative of the fact that the government does not really expect prices of gas to go up, price of fertilizers to go up, and accordingly to higher subsidy allocation. But I think it's a fairly reasonable assumption that when we start on a particular financial year, we assume that the crude oil prices remain where they are. But we have seen in the past that even in case there is some spike out there, there is a method, a formula which exists by which the government, along with the oil marketing companies, make the necessary adjustment in their own accounts to ensure that the final consumer is not really hit hard. But that we'll have to see as and when the crisis comes in. But as of now, I think it's a reasonable assumption to make that things will remain normal on this particular front.
Right. Lastly, DK Joshi, of course, the infrastructure push has come out really, really closely this budget. Of course, railways getting the key focus as well. Your thoughts really on capital expenditure and the balancing act, as it were, going forward that we'll need to maintain?
Well, I think the budget is also a reflection on the private investment cycle, which is becoming broad-based but hasn't become broad-based as yet. So government feels the need to support investments via the budget. And although I think the allocations have been tweaked a little bit, I think the focus has changed a little bit within the infrastructure investment itself. But overall, I think it is capacity creating. So this kind of focus leads to productive capacity in the economy, which is good in the near term as well as for the medium to long term, because enhancements of productive capacity leads to higher potential growth going ahead.
Right. Lastly, Madan, Sabnavis, of course, we have often spoken about the rural economy, jobs at large. So your thoughts really on what this interim budget lays out for job generation going forward?
No, the way I look at the budget, I think there's nothing directly for job creation. I think there are a lot of support programs which are there, because that's one of the 4 priorities of the government, which was mentioned earlier. For the poor people, you're talking of the farmers. So there have been lots of allocations out there. But finally, if you're looking in terms of jobs, I think it'll have to come from the private sector. Or if you're talking in terms of agriculture, in terms of more commercialization of agriculture, which hires more labor, more skilled labor, that's a different kind of a process. I don't think it's the responsibility or the job of a budget to really address the issue of employment. And to the extent that the government employs people, I think that's where we see things happening. Otherwise, the government is an enabler. So even when you look at the urban sector, we see the PLI. It's a case of saying that we provide you certain incentives so that the private sector is able to invest, you're able to produce, you're able to employ more people. So that's how the employment generation takes place. In agriculture, what we have seen is, or rather in the rural sector, most of the allocations are more towards sustaining people, sustaining families. There may not be a direct impact, but definitely things like Nariga are some things which directly give you jobs, but also not of permanent nature. We should keep that in mind.
Right. So an enabler at large, a balanced document, a vision for the future. Thank you so much for both of you to spare the time and to join us with this decoding really from the economist perspective. The macro numbers look good, and hopefully July will be even better and give us a complete picture of India's economy. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.